Okay, so I don't got a lot of time today, and I'm starting this kind of late, but I found out Father's Day is coming up, so I'm going to be doing that, and tomorrow is D&D. So I'm probably just going to record only this chapter today. I don't know, if chapter 8's short enough, maybe I can squeak it out. I wouldn't bet on it, and I wouldn't go hunting for it, though. I did get lazy with the background on this one. Did I make a fucking Yes, I did open CapCut, but I did not make a project. I'm gonna do that. Anyway, this is chapter 7 of Black Cats Are Bad Luck and So Are You, Kid by Holly. Izuku was released back into the couple's apartment and jumped onto the couch, flopping onto it and sighing. He was ready to take a long nap. His homeroom teacher chuckled softly and went to put the carrier away, while the blonde walked over to him and sat on the other side of the couch. The man groaned and leaned back, his head back over the back of the couch, sighing tiredly. The other man walked in and sat beside the blonde. Between him and Izuku, the raven-haired man looked down at Izuku and grinned. So, we should talk about what you've seen and heard. I know for a fact we have done some things in the past few days that were not quite PG-13. Zuko glared at the man and shook his head. He would rather forget all he saw. Thank you very much. Though the man chuckled fondly and pat the boy's side. Just don't talk about any of what you saw, please. I don't want the class to find out I'm married, especially to their English teacher. The boy looked up at the man and nodded, too tired to care, and let his head flop back down onto the soft cushion of the couch. The man above him chuckled more and picked Izuku up, much to the boy's disdain. He was comfortable and he didn't want to be moved. He began petting him behind the ears. That spot felt really good as a cat. His teacher chuckled and kept petting him, reaching an arm around his partner and leaning against him. Sushi jumped onto the blonde's lap and turned his nose up at Izuku, kneading the man's lap and twisting into a circle, eventually plopping down onto the now awake and bewildered man's lap. His homeroom teacher chuckled and reached over to pet the cat's head. He was appreciative of the attention. Izuku yawned and relaxed, as the man would probably bring him back if he moved off him, so he closed his eyes and enjoyed the other's warmth. Azal watched as those around him fell asleep, the long day wearing them thin. He still had to think for food for Midoriya, as the boy probably wasn't eating due to the food being cat food. Azawa himself probably wouldn't eat it either if he was in the boy's position, though he was happy as the boy was close to him and he officially knew where he was. The stress of his child disappearing after a fight disappearing quickly. His husband beside him was beginning to snore, Sushi finally content on his lap and purring slowly, coming to a stop as the fluff ball fell asleep himself. Zuko was laid on his side on his lap, breathing slowly. The man watched him breathe for a while, ensuring himself that the boy was indeed alive and well. After a while his phone buzzed, and he slowly shimmied it from his pocket, doing his best not to disturb those sleeping around him. He turned it on and saw a text from the rat Satan himself, Nezu. He sighed and opened it to read. Hello, Azawa. I hope you've had a good evening. I'm sending you the contact information for Midoriya's mother. She would love to see her son. I will let you make those arrangements. Also, for your other questions, yes, the boy is welcome to come to school when it begins in 2 days, though he may not participate in physical activities for obvious reasons. Be sure he stays close to you, and here are some cat-safe human foods you may feed him. Best wishes, Nezu. Link. Azawa sighed. The rat always messaged like he was sending a fucking letter, though it was informal. Zawa replied to him with a simple thanks and opened the link. He read it thoroughly, absentmindedly petting the cat on his lap. Eventually his eyes grew heavy and he yawned, turning his phone off and setting it onto his lap before leaning onto his husband's shoulder and slowly falling asleep himself and joining the other members of his household in dreamland. Zuko awoke to a loud and rapid knocking at the door, spooking all the occupants of the apartment. The blond man grumbled and stood, walking over to the door, while the man whose lap Zuko was still on blinked slowly as if he was trying to figure out where and who he was. Zuko sat up on the man's lap and crawled up onto his shoulder, bumping his face into his cheek. The man watched him curiously and chuckled once Zuko bumped into him. Hello, what's that for? Zuko shrugged and jumped off him, walking towards the door to see who had arrived. Though, as he entered the hall, he heard a shrill squeal that made his fur stand on end. Oh, honey, he's adorable! Zuko slowly looked over to see his arts and history teacher running at him at full speed. Before he could react and run off, he was scooped up into her arms and twirled around while being hugged tightly. God, he's so fucking cute! He meowed unhappily and tried to wiggle out of the woman's tight hold. As he was uncomfortably close to her chest and he had already ruined his view of his homeroom teacher and English teacher. Namuri put him down. His saving grace, he meowed desperately at his homeroom teacher. Meow! 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 And the woman sighed and deposited the boy back onto the floor, where he promptly ran off and jumped onto the counter to be safe. The woman watched him curiously and with a big grin. Oh, so now we're letting His homeroom teacher was quick to slap a hand on the woman's mouth to silence her, but Izuku already had to deal with her sex jokes during the sports festival. How that was allowed, he didn't know. The woman pulled his hand back and grinned at him. Why, can't my fat puss can't sit on it, but he can? His teacher sighed tiredly and the blonde began to snicker. He has fur and paws. I do too. Namuri! The man glared at the snickering woman as she began to burst out into laughter. The blonde in the hall following her lead. His homeroom teacher sighed and rubbed his temple. Zuko tilted his head at the man and meowed. Meow. You good? The man looked over at him and sighed, walking over to pat his back. Don't tell anyone about this. I will hear about it. Zuko nodded quickly and looked at his two teachers, now slowing their laughter. Zuko sighed and flicked his tail a few times, the man above him huffing in amusement. So, what brings you here, Nem, Murray? The woman sighed and wiped a tear from her eye, standing. I heard they found the wayward child, and that you had him. We were told you would give us more info the day before we come back during that meeting, but... She grinned and its teacher sighed. You came here. Yep, so where's the child? She began to look around, and before the men above him could reply, Zuko stopped him, flicking his ear. The man looked at him for a moment before grinning. In a box in our closet. The blonde looked at him curiously, but before he could correct the man, the woman was already up and running towards their bedroom, looking around for him. As she was calling out for him and looking around, his homeroom teacher pushed her in and slammed the door shut and locked it, leaning on the outside while she banged on the door. Shoda, open this door! Get out of my house! I'm stuck in your closet! Sawa looked down as Zuko gave him a look that said, You hearing this? Zuko huffed, amused. It jumped onto the bed, scrambling up haphazardly. The man chuckled at him and the banging stopped. The blonde came into the room and sighed. Sho, let her out of the closet. You're being a bad example. She started it. The blonde sighed and walked over, having a steering contest with the other before swiping his feet out from under his homeroom teacher and making him fall, dragging him away from the door and unlocking it. Bully. You're the one shoving people in closets like some 80s bully. That's bullying. The closet door opened and the dark-haired woman stepped out. Asshole, where's the child? The blonde pointed to Izuku, who was sitting on the bed, watching the three. His homeroom teacher sighed and laid fully on the ground, giving up the deception. The woman looked over at him and scoffed. Your new cat you've been sending me pictures of? Izuku glanced at the other man. When had he taken pictures of him? Oh, right. The morning after he was turned, when he was curled up by his teacher's head. Izuku sighed and scratched the back of his head. The woman walked over to pat his head. This cutie? That's a cat. Zuko shook his head at the woman in response and watched as she paled quicker and she barged into the apartment. Okay, so I fucking love this fic still. I I kept dying of laughter. I have a friend in this call right now, and they're just chilling. I don't know if Dust wants to say hi in the outro, but yeah, Dust is just chilling here. Anyway, I kept fucking dying. Like, the 80s bully comment made me have to reread it like twice. Because I just couldn't not laugh. Oh my gosh. Crack, the actual bane of trying to say something that is absolutely absurd with a straight face when you haven't practiced since middle school is an actual experience. Anyway, this is chapter 7 of Black Cats Are Bad Luck and So Are You, Kid. I am going to end this now and bye.